Over the past few years, the Trails series has become a hot topic for JRPG fans with its many interconnected titles that, to put bluntly, all kick ass. We are now in 2024, another year, another Trails game, but this one is different. Trails Through Daybreak is the newest installment in Falcons' massive JRPG series, but is set in an entirely new location and features a brand new cast of main characters, and this excited me so much. Sure, I absolutely love the expansive cast from the previous 10 games. Characters like Estelle, Ren, and Kevin are some of my favorite video game characters ever, but it's time to move on, or specifically, move to the east, to the Calvard region. This new setting and cast of characters makes Daybreak a great entry point for Trails newcomers. Lately, there's been a massive discourse going around regarding the best place to start this ginormous series. Yeah, obviously, the best place to start would be the very start with Sky FC, but this can be very daunting as not everyone has 600 hours to spend on a single series. That is why, if this looks like a series you might be into, I highly recommend starting with Daybreak. There's also the fact that this game is rock solid and a great introduction to the next Trails arc. And as this game has only just been released, I'm going to keep things as spoiler free as possible. Before we get into the review, I'd like to thank the publishers for the review code, and all footage you see is from the PS5 version of the game. It would also help me out a lot to hit that like button and sub for more Trails and JRPG content coming soon. Are you excited for Trails Through Daybreak? Have you played it yet? What's your experience with the series? Let me know in the comments below. Alright, let's get into it. Trails Through Daybreak is set in Calvard, a large country located east of Erebonia from the Cold Steel games. The main character Van is a Spriggan who takes on semi-shady jobs when clients don't want the bracers or the police getting involved. At the start of the game, Van is approached by a high school student, Agnes Clodel, who needs his help to find a family artifact known as a Genesis. This is the start of a long and epic journey, and just about everything that follows this revolves around the Genesis artifacts and the powers and mysteries that they hold. This story is told through chapters. At the start of each chapter, there will be a lot of exposition, proceeding with Van exploring the capital of Edith to take on several lengthy side quests. This leads to Van and crew venturing out to a new location for even more side quests and a little story progression, then more side quests and more story progression, then finally concluding with some significant story development and a major boss fight, which were the clear highlights of the game for me. A lot of the time, Daybreak feels like Trails Through side quests, even more so than other games in the series. There were many points where there were hours between any combat, and I felt that this did drag on a little bit. But with that said, if you are familiar with the series, this pacing should come to no surprise. Each of the side quests involves solving problems for people and requires Van and crew to work through dungeons, fight monsters, or just run around town talking to NPCs. And while many of these are optional, you're going to want to do them, not only to learn about the world and the characters within, but also for the rewards such as earning SP to raise your Spriggan rank. On this note, you'll often get the option of how to resolve a side quest, and this has an impact on your morality, which is made up of law, grey, and chaos. This morality system doesn't directly change the story, but it does allow you to side with different factions later in the game. Outside of these side quests and occasionally viewing bonding events with other characters, there really isn't much else to do. There are achievements, which mostly unlock naturally, as well as an overly simplified cooking system, but that's about it. It was a real shame that there were no side quests at all, especially after all the fun I had with Vantage Masters from the previous games. While the story itself is very solid, there is still the age-old issue with its delivery in its semi-voice scenes, which feels worse than it's ever been. The voice acting is great, but most of the time only some characters will have voice acting in these scenes, and this really ruins the immersion. I was so disappointed that this long-running series issue wasn't addressed in Daybreak. I don't know, is it just me that has a problem here? Let me know in the comments below. But putting this aside, the story is really awesome with some great highs and a solid soundtrack, and this really helps make Daybreak my favourite debut title out of all of the Trails arcs. But if you are new to the series, just be aware that Trails games have always been slow burners with a lot of time dedicated to world building, and Daybreak does not change this formula. One of the things that I was the most excited for when coming into Daybreak was the brand new cast of characters. The recent Trails games have all felt like the Avengers, with nearly everyone coming together creating an overly bloated roster. Now, things feel new and fresh, and this really makes Daybreak a great entry point into the series. Let's start with Van. He's an awesome protagonist, and given his job as a Spriggan, has much more of a grey side than that goody two-shoes Rain. He is definitely up there with Estelle and Kevin as my favourite Trails protagonists. The accompanying cast of main characters who support Van's Spriggan work are also really awesome, and the fact that there's only several of them means we get a lot more time to learn about them and watch them shine. Throughout Van's travels, he'll meet loads of new characters, some of which will play the role as a temporary party member. But not everything is new. Several past characters will also make a return, such as the Bracer Zin, who we haven't seen since the Sky trilogy. And I'll tell you what, this is exactly how it should be with returning characters. No longer does everyone just appear for the sake of it, which almost completely diminishes the impact of their appearances. Now, characters making a return actually feels meaningful, and there are several occasions where I was so excited and surprised to see old faces return. I'm not going to spoil any of these outside of Zin, who you meet very early in the game, but if you're a long-time fan of the series, you are in for a treat. Daybreak's dungeon design is one thing that hasn't really seen much of an improvement from its predecessors. Most of the time, it's just the same old corridors that all look identical, full of enemies and treasure chests. Daybreak's new big feature here, however, is the ability to attack enemies in an action combat style. For all regular encounters, you can freely switch between action and turn-based systems, with the boss fights always locked into turn-based. Mechanically, this action combat is incredibly simple, and I do hope it evolves in the future. Each character is limited to a basic attack, a charged attack, and a dodge. The idea here is that you can wear down your foes a little, stun them, then release your shards to enter the turn-based mode with an advantage. This also makes rolling through weaker enemies so quick and easy, as well as providing a quicker way to build up your character's CP. Despite the simplicity of the action combat, I absolutely loved this hybrid system, as it's something I've never ever seen before. One of Daybreak's other major steps forward is with its turn-based combat system, and in my opinion, it's the best it's ever been. This combat still retains the traditional Trails mechanics such as arts, crafts, and S-crafts, but with several significant additions that makes it feel completely fresh but still familiar. Starting with the movement, each character now has a range that they can freely move without expending a turn. If you unleash an attack near an ally, you'll do extra damage. However, by not spreading out, you will run the risk of being the target of an enemy AoE attack. Certain crafts also do more damage from the side or from the back of an enemy, so this positioning is something else you'll need to consider. The other major new addition is using S boosts to buff your characters in different ways depending on their setup. These boosts last for a couple of turns and need to be used strategically, as 2 boosts are also required to unleash your character's super powerful S-craft in addition to the 100 CP. Using an S-craft also gives you more total S boosts for that battle, so it's all about balancing their use. I felt that this was a massive upgrade from the previous Trails games. Also worth mentioning is that there are now 2 sides to the turn order. The enemy's order is shown to the right with your parties to the left. It may not seem like this would make much of a difference, but it does, by the fact that you're no longer able to jump in line with an S-craft to steal an enemy's turn order bonus. If there's one minor criticism I have with the combat, it's that there's no easy way to see what all the buff and debuff icons mean. You can view these in the help section outside of battle, but that obviously doesn't help things when you're in battle. I mean, sometimes you have a dozen icons next to a single character, and a single screen that pops up to break down what those actually mean would be so helpful. Something else worth mentioning is the Grendel fights. At the end of each chapter, one of the major boss fights will involve Van turning into a Grendel and taking on some larger type of enemy, and this definitely reminded me of the Divine Knight battles from Cold Steel. This time, however, the combat basically remains the same, with Van now being able to string together multiple super powerful crafts in a single turn. I felt that these were a pretty epic way to conclude each chapter. Overall, this combat is my new favourite in the series due to the perfectly evolved turn-based mechanics and the fact that there's now the action element to dungeon crawling, which makes it even greater. Daybreak's RPG mechanics have also seen a huge overhaul thanks to the Zypher system. Just like the combat, these Orbment mechanics have seen some significant changes but also feel very familiar. To start with, each character's Zypher has 4 lines where you can input quartz. These quartz not only provide stat boosts, but by combining different elemental values, you can unlock a range of passive skills such as adding additional elemental damage when attacking. If you're up for it, there is a lot of tinkering that you can do here to unlock the most powerful skills. Then there's the character's Hollow Core that can be leveled up through gaining experience. These work a bit like the Master Quartz from previous games, but their purpose here is to provide unique kinds of bonuses when a character uses their S boosts in battle. Finally, there's Drivers, and these dictate which arts a character can cast. Each driver will contain a number of defined arts to use in battle with different amounts of free slots where purchase arts can be plugged in. I feel that this is the peak of Trails customization. There is a lot to think about, and the way that more slots, quartz, plugins, drivers, and hollow cores gradually open up through the game ensures that there's always something new to play with. Trails Through Daybreak is an excellent addition to the Trails series and a very strong start to the Calvard story arc. The new setting and new cast of characters is a refreshing change and also makes it the perfect entry point for those looking to get into the series. And while the story is really strong and has some great highs, the pacing often feels very slow with hours and hours of dialogue and side questing. But the hybrid combat system is perhaps the greatest new feature. While the action side of things is very simple yet welcomed, the outstanding turn-based combat really moves the series forward in the right direction. The same can be said about the new Orbment mechanics too, with the Zypher system providing a lot to tinker with. And I know I've said it before, but it's still an issue for me. The halved voice scenes really need to go. Trails Through Daybreak is exactly what I wanted from a new Trails game, and I highly recommend it to both long-time fans and those new to the series. Are you excited for Trails Through Daybreak? What's your experience with the series? Let me know in the comments below. This was Hellfire RPGs, thanks for watching. If you like this review, it would help me out a lot to hit that like button and sub for more Trails and JRPG content coming soon. See you next time.